So Tim, thank you for coming on the Lived Experience, and you're a return guest. So you're my first returned guest, and I thought of you because I was going through mental health month, which is a whole month in Australia in October, where it's about mental health and mental health awareness. And I'm sort of thinking, well, people with bipolar and stuff like that, I never really heard anything about that during this month, and it sort of prompted me, well, let's get Tim back on again. Let's get some great insights like we did last time into what it's like living with bipolar and having that condition and being successful running a business as well. And your thoughts on the whole mental health awareness movement, where it needs to go and all that sort of stuff. So first of all, how are you, mate?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Thank you. I think this year's been an exciting one for me. We were speaking in our chats. I haven't had a lengthy period of depression. I've had sort of bits and spurts, but it's been an interesting year with my mental health. And yeah, thanks for having me back on. It's always good to look back through these interviews. My uncle even mentioned once, he said that I should listen to your interviews that you've done of me if I'm ever going into a depressive period, because it's almost like myself giving myself advice. So no, thank you. I appreciate you giving me the time to come on.
Yeah, I was watching it back again. I was sort of like, some nuggets of gold in here. I've got to get Tim back on again for some more thoughts to go deep, because I consume a lot of mental illness, mental health content, and it's generally the same thing about depression with the person, right? So a person's got, let's say, not clinical depression, but let's say popularized depression, if I could use that word, and that's really it. I never hear much about bipolar schizophrenia, and the frustrating for me by the October Mental Health Month was I didn't hear terms like bipolar, schizophrenia, BPD, anorexia even. I didn't hear these things mentioned once, and it was very, very frustrating to me, because in regards to how serious those conditions are, and they can be on family members and all that sort of stuff, and the person as well, it's very underrepresented in the whole movement.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, I don't know if it's maybe due to my lack of awareness or seeking it out. I didn't know that it was Mental Health Month until I saw your posts.
Okay.
So thank you for bringing the awareness to it. Now, again, that might just have been me with my busy schedule, but yeah, that might be just an interesting thing to start off with. Was there enough communication around that month? Apologies to the person who was spearheading it, but personally, I didn't see much apart from yourself.
Yeah, well, I see a lot of it. Well, I spend a lot of time online in my job, and I see a lot of those posts, which is cool. But I remember talking to Brad McEwen about this. He's a Beyond Blue ambassador, and we're basically saying the same thing. The time for awareness is over. What is actually happening? What are the outcomes? What's being put in place? Because it's almost like there's enough of awareness movement, but what's the actual things that are making impacts in people's lives? So is there anything in the last year that firsthand that is out there in regards to making a significant impact?
I think the biggest thing for me actually has been finding a support group. Specifically, it's a bipolar support group. Bipolar Life is the name. A friend of mine said that, do you want to come in? And that for me was really fantastic, because you've got brilliant resources like Beyond Blue and Black Dog and the bigger institutions doing really good activations, really good information. But I found that something this year was really good, finding like-minded people, and it was great to even be able to talk about your show. It's lived experience, and I'd go to a few meetings. Hopefully you got a few listeners from that.
I appreciate that. Thanks.
But that was something that I think has been massive for me, and even recommending that to friends that I know who have just been diagnosed too. I think that as an example and a platform was really cool, because I didn't find anything when I first got diagnosed of, well, it's really cool to go and talk to people with the similar lived experience. So that was something that I've found interesting this year, that I've personally found.
Yeah, and I think it's a unique thing with bipolar, because I know my mum would not have gone to a group. Nothing wrong with her. She would definitely not have gone to a group, and I know some relations who definitely would have gone to a group. So it takes a lot of insight and actually self-actualization to go to a group if you've got a bipolar, I feel as though, because I just know from my personal experience that my mum definitely would not have done that.
Yeah, it definitely took the self-awareness, and I was in a period where I was feeling great at the time. I was very baseline, so there was no real resistance to going there. Would there be resistance if I was maybe in a depressed or a manic state? Possibly, but I think just the awareness that there was that group there or things similar to that. I just find that exciting that if you're in a baseline period, because I sat there in the first meeting and I was like, well, do I have to be here? Because I was feeling good. So I had those similar, I guess, reactions to you'd say your mum would have, but then it clicked on me and I said, well, hang on, if I'm here when I'm healthy, and these people notice, okay, well, these are not typical behaviors. They notice that I drop off, they might reach out. And that's where it can be actually really supportive. So especially something with bipolar where your mood can change so, drastically and dramatically, it's good to have people that also understand from that lived experience standpoint.
I think there's just a certain level of understanding. You don't need to really say much to each other. You both know what's involved with it. There's no one lecturing you. You both come from a position where you know exactly what's happening to you, and that's really important. So I was going to say to you though, I was looking at a report the other day, which was from Bipolar Australia from the 2018-19 submission to Victorian Mental Health Royal Commission, and it basically estimated that the cost of bipolar to the economy was around $8.1 billion a year. Yet we've got all this, let's say I think it's around $1 billion of funding for mental health in Victoria alone. But when you look at the whole, just one condition by itself, the amount of money it costs the economy, do you think that we're doing enough, or that, what more can be done to address this issue?
Yeah, I think what we've done for depression and anxiety has been fantastic. I think the communication around that has been great. But as we've talked about a couple of times, and you've probably said a number of times on posts and in this podcast as well, that that same level of communication around schizophrenia, bipolar, any other disorder just isn't there. And, sometimes to the point where explaining the difference between bipolar and depression, or a bipolar depression and a normal depression, it would be fantastic to just say, hey, I have bipolar, and then there be that surface level understanding. That would be great. So yeah, but I know it's been a massive effort for that conversation around depression and anxiety to get to where it is. So, is it the same effort required for every other mental illness? I believe there should be. But that's a very interesting conversation. I'd be keen to know what you've seen in that space as well. Where I guess, what am I trying to say? Yeah, I guess I'm trying to repeat the question back to you.
Well, for me, it's like the suicide rate with bipolar. I think it was like, in that report, just referring to this report, it was like 1,600 people, I think, in the year who had bipolar committed suicide. There was a lot more who attempted things and all that sort of stuff, right? So when they do the stats around, 1 in 6 men or whatever commit suicide, well, it's like 1 in 6 men. I'd love to see with the conditions or something listed, because there'd be a disproportionate amount of people who have bipolar and schizophrenia who would unfortunately take their own lives, as to, let's say, the generic depression, which we're all aware of. So there's a massive disproportionate amount of people, unfortunately, committing suicide with those serious mental illnesses, as opposed to the generalized depression, which receives all the awareness. But that's my little take on it.
Yeah, and it's actually it's really interesting. A friend of mine who studied psychology, he's gone on to do his master's and probably an honours or PhD soon. One of the first things he said to me, he was very concerned, and yes, he was very green and young into his studies, but he knew that people with bipolar do have higher suicide rates, and the likelihood, because your mood swings so much, that does tend to happen. And it was something that he was very concerned about when I was first diagnosed. So now he was trained, and he was able to talk to me about that, and that was an interesting period. But it would be great if those figures were more readily available, for sure.
Yeah, well, the reason why I was exposed to it is because growing up, Mum would always make friends inside the psych ward, and when they both got out, they'd catch up or whatever. And probably I remember 4 of them or 5 of them committed suicide. And you have to go to these funerals as a kid, and it's like you met that person probably 2-3 weeks ago, or you met him in the psych ward. So that was just the reality of it, and that's how I knew it as, and that's the fear that was always living with me, with someone who had that condition.
And the thing that's really terrible is, especially with bipolar, well, for my specific example, if you're in a depressed state, but you start to do all the things that's right for you, i.e. get the proper medication, reach out to those conversations that are really, holding over you, you can get better so at a rapid pace. You can get better really quickly. That swing back up, at least for me, has been incredibly quick. So the disappointing thing about that is, if it is a bipolar suicide, from my perspective at least, it's a shame, because it might have been the difference between 1 day or 2 days or even a week that would have changed that person's decision from committing suicide than to actually getting better. And again, something for me to listen to again is, it's very interesting. And that's kind of the benefit of bipolar, in a way that the recovery time is quick once you start to get the right things right, especially for my case. And that's something that I actually see as a benefit, and quite positive to this illness. Is, if it was just depression, then maybe it would be harder to climb back to a baseline. But I've found that as soon as I've got medication right, as soon as I've reached out to the right people, fixed the things or the problems that I think are facing me, I've been able to very quickly get better again.
Can you give an example of maybe that? Let's say what you've done to do that.
Sure thing. I can give an example of literally the last three months. So, as of probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, my phone was turned off. I've been retreating a little bit, and some warning signs have came in, and I was probably just not in a great speaking mood, and triggers and warnings of a bipolar depression were coming about for the last 3 weeks. Not getting out of bed, not doing all the things, and one of those situations was actually just work with a client, a consistent client of mine. I dropped the ball on a few things. Another situation happened where filming, the focus point wasn't quite right, so I had to go out and refilm this situation. So there were a couple of things that added on top of it as just normal stresses. But then what happened was, instead of ignoring all of these situations, I went to the client and just said, "Hey, this is where we're at. And I know I've dropped the ball here." And I just opened up a line of communication, instead of, there was probably 5 or so messages sitting there from them, and they were like, where are you? So I kind of confronted that situation, whereas in the past probably wouldn't have done that, and then that would have just kept going and spiraled me into something. But the thing is it already was spiraling me, because I wasn't facing that situation. And I know it sounds like a pretty surface level thing, but you have that, then add on another thing and another thing and another thing, and your ability to deal with stress just tipples over. But instead, I went the other way. I kind of faced it, had the conversation that I needed to have, and now I'm feeling better, feeling good enough to do this interview. Whereas probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, I might have missed your message, because my phone would have been off. So
sure.
Sorry if that was rambling, but that was probably a specific example.
So how do you go managing? Because you run a small business, which can be stressful as nuts for anyone. So how do you manage your mental health plus running a business? Because you mentioned the keyword there, stress. And I know from my lived experience with my mum, every time she started a part-time job, within 2 weeks, she'd be stressed, in a hospital, manic. So she couldn't never work, always on a disability pension, even though she wanted to work and she tried to work. It just wasn't good for her. So how do you manage the stress component, especially with bipolar?
Yeah, so when I'm doing it well, I'm walking every day. I think the interesting thing with COVID and being told that you can have your hour walk, more people started going out and doing their walk. But it's amazing how beneficial that is. So overlooking the exercise component can be very dangerous. And that's super basic.
That's in general life, I think, for everyone, not just people with mental health. It's just everything. Yeah,
that's a general one. The other things that helps as well is, I really need to keep up communication with people. So for me, that's the biggest thing. As soon as I start letting a few messages slip or I don't get back to people, there has to be a little bit of leeway there. But for me, it's at least keeping in communication with a core group of people, even my dad, my family. So that's a big thing. And then, it's interesting, your diet as well. When I'm in a low mood, it's very easy to drive to McDonald's.
We've all been there. We've all been there.
Yeah. Well, exactly. But I think the biggest thing really is the exercise, and the biggest, and then also continuing being productive and communication as well. As soon as I stop working, even and I let one project slip and another project slip, that's when things start to escalate. So even if it's a matter of, I don't feel like doing something today, figure out like 10% or 20% of the thing that you can do. And sometimes it's also the schedule and the sleep. The good thing about being self-employed from a mental health perspective is, the boss is always going to say yes to a sick day, which is it's a good and bad thing, but also in a sense of, I can have my own schedule. So if I need to, stay a little bit longer in bed till 10 or 11, I'll do that. But it also will mean I'll work until 7 or 8 or 9, or even last night I was up until 2. But then today I was able to kind of take it a little bit easy. So the self-employed schedule actually works really well for me. So that could be another thing is having a schedule that works for you. So that schedule works for me, but what's the one that works for someone else? So I guess to summarize all those things, it would be the exercise, keeping busy, doing work, and then having a schedule that works for you.
Some great points then. That's just for anyone in general. I think the exercise thing, I'm on the man shakes now. I'm back on the man shakes, trying to lose some weight and doing some exercise regularly. And you just got to gut it out and stick through with it. You just feel a lot better for it. And knowing that you stick with it as well, because if you don't do it for 2 days or whatever, you feel a bit of a failure, and then you can get a bit of a hole. And I think it's just in general life, no problem at all. I was going to say to you as well with bipolar as well. I was recounting a story the other day where I've had experiences with my mum who was manic, and then the way to get her, you couldn't get them help when you knew they were unwell. So, for example, you're in your group, right? Let's say, for example, you knew someone you knew they were going to be involuntary, let's say in 2 weeks or whatever, but there's nothing you can really do before that. So do you have any thoughts around the actual getting the mental health support when you actually need it, or are just about to go over the edge?
Yeah. This is a thing where you can really lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I've had so many situations where I should have made an appointment with my doctor, and if I did that, it would have saved 3 months of being in a depressed state. But in terms of practically getting someone's support, this is where it's important to have that close group of people that know your diagnosis and know your little triggers and also behavior sets that happen. So I'm in a really fortunate position now that if I stop posting on social media, or if I maybe miss some phone calls and don't respond in a couple of weeks, I've got a few people that message me and go, what's going on? And that is a symptom, and how that's come about is every time I got better again, I would tell specific people, this is what happens if I'm not in a good state. And it's interesting, like I got a message from someone today who, same thing, they were like, I haven't seen you post or anything, what's going on? So that would be the biggest thing to get the help when you need it, is actually build that support network when you're healthy, because then it's going to be the people that you tell, they're going to notice when you need the support the most. So that's, however you do that, however you feel comfortable doing that, that's probably my advice on that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just trying to also get at, because you've been hospitalised before. So
yeah, very briefly.
Very briefly, very short time. So, but was that a process where were you voluntary in that situation, or involuntary, or what happened?
No, that was when I was first diagnosed. So a lot of the time with bipolar, you'll get diagnosed with depression first. In my case, I was then given antidepressants to go on, and that then put me into a manic state, and then the diagnosis. So it was a cause of having that real big boost from the antidepressants, and that didn't go too well, and that was why I was hospitalized. The good thing, and I guess where I'm fortunate, is it got to a stage with the depressive period that I was in where, like, I was still with my parents at the stage. I was early 20s, and had support around me, that when things went the other way, people were like, oh, hang on, this isn't normal. And I think it was even because I went in to the psych appointment with the psychologist at my GP's, and I was really excited because for the majority of the time with this doctor, I'd just been quiet, and like I didn't talk. It was really hard to get anything out of me, and I was just really excited to now be able to talk to this person. And then obviously he was like, oh, hang on, this isn't right. And then it was an upstairs one, and then we went downstairs and my GP was there. He's like, this isn't right, and basically went straight to hospital off the back of that. So again, you could say that was quite fortunate too, that I was actually in the best place possible. That when I had my first manic episode was actually from my memory at least, was in the doctor's office. Obviously I was displaying symptoms all the way there, but yeah, that was really fascinating. So for me, it was just a matter of, okay, like, people around me, the authority figures in my life just telling me, like, yep, this is where you need to go.
Now, do you think that, because I know from my experience, ambulance and police are the first people who always deal with, let's say, if some neighbours call the cops on my mum or whatever they did, it would always be the police and then the ambulance. And like for me, and I'm thinking at this stage now, with all this money that we waste on roads not getting made or whatever, like, it's almost like at the stage where I think there needs to be a dedicated mental health first responder force, or some cars or something, like mental health first responders, because the ambulance people paramedics and police are overworked as it is. Some sort of dedicated mental health force, or like I say, offshoot of the ambulance, that are the first responders for people with mental health conditions. Because I just, from knowing from my partner who works in an ED nurse, like, it's just astounding the amount of mental health presentations. People who have got schizophrenia and bipolar who would have a long history, they have to go there first, then be committed and get the help they actually need. I just think there's a really big disconnect. We're saying, we're going to put all these resources into mental health, but I don't think we don't have even a dedicated, let's say, mental health support emergency service. We're still using paramedics to do that. What are your thoughts on that whole thing? Yeah,
especially because paramedics trained in so many areas, like they got to respond to a lot of things. So obviously they're going to have a good level of knowledge of what's going on. But I think there might be specific examples where the person could be violent, could be acting out, and they're doing that because of the condition that they're in. So if there's a mental health person there that can understand and communicate and bridge that gap, I think that's a great idea. I think there's definitely situations where that would come in handy, and get someone the help they need a lot quicker, rather than, I don't know, maybe it hasn't happened to me, but how many people would have been in a manic state and now they're in jail instead of in hospital overnight, for example. So that would be an interesting perspective. Have you sort of heard stories on that yourself? Like,
I know first. Yeah, I know
even
firsthand.
With your mum, like,
yeah, I know firsthand. And the thing is, I'm trying to. I remember I did a video just on a story about, extensive mental health history, manic. I went to drive her to the psych ward, which she's been in multiple times, late at night, Christmas Eve, and I went to drive her there. Oh, they're not closed. You have to go. You have to call the ambulance. So I couldn't even take her to the emergency ward. I had to call the ambulance to follow procedure. Then I had to do a mental health assessment. So we're waiting there for like 6 hours, and they're asking her all these questions. Do you have a mental health condition? It's like, come on, mate. You've got the extensive history there, and I'm getting real frustrated. But the point I'm trying to make is that, mental health is such a well-known thing, yet we don't seem to have an emergency system or a support system in place for when people really need their help. There's nothing really dedicated, from what I know, into helping people.
So you were with your mum. You were trying to get your mum help, and you drove her directly to where you knew she needed to be.
Yes,
but then you needed to turn around and go somewhere else first.
I had to we had to call an ambulance to then take her to the emergency ward. We then had to do a mental health assessment, and then they would decide whether to make her involuntary or not. And this is someone in a very elevated manic state. Eyes going like back and forth. Yep. So this was only probably 5 years ago. That's what I was asking. Is I'm just interested in the experience from your perspective with the when you needed to actually get help. What was the process like? All that sort of stuff.
Well, I think to use that example, I think this is where it's actually could be an interesting thing to say. Have someone as that registered support network, because you are the best person in that situation to look after your mum, and unless you can't physically control what's going on. You knew exactly where she needed to be. There would have been a medical history of what's going on, and there should have almost been more authority on your behalf there, I think.
Yeah, think so?
Yeah, that's sort of my answer to that. And then I think that could open up the wider conversation of, we have emergency contacts for, if I decide to go and do plumbing for the day, and then I do something, fall off a ladder, they'll probably call my mum, right? So that's a physical industry. But do you have a emergency contact if someone's displaying manic symptoms or schizophrenic symptoms? Like, could that be a different person you talk to, and would that save some time? That's quite interesting to me, just off the top of my head.
Well, the frustrating thing for me is when you knew they were getting sick, and we all knew they were getting sick 2 to 3 weeks prior, and even the mental health worker who was their support said, she has to be made involuntary. So she has to get so unwell that we make her involuntary. So you've got a 2 to 3 week period where she's not well, she's driving a car and got a family and stuff. Yet this is even the psychologists would say, you have to let her go to get really unwell, then we make her involuntary. And that's still the case with the system. That's why I asked that question, because I was just very curious to hear about the process with your hospitalisation and how was that. I was just trying to reflect it back to what my experience has been with it.
I mean, I've always been, and this is throughout my entire mental health journey, I've always been super fortunate with the support network around me. And I just know that other people haven't been as lucky. So every time I have had that, that main manic phase, or felt like I've been going that way, I've been able to have people around me. So this is, that's probably why I've been able to be so high functioning, or, get over the things that that has been harder for other people, is because of that support network. Is there a way that we can build that for more people? How do we have that support network when it's not in place? I've had two great parents, friends, family, partners, and that's something that I've really relied on, and very fortunate to have that. But I know there's a lot of people that don't have that. So how could we replicate that? That would be a question that I'd be interested in kind of figuring out an answer to. Because who does your mum have? Your mum has yourself.
Oh, back in Perth, she had 0 people because we had no family in Perth. Whereas when we moved to country Victoria, she's from 10. She's one of 11, so she has all her brothers and sisters. So that was good. But her condition is pretty serious, where she wouldn't listen to anyone and all that sort of stuff. Wouldn't take her medicine, and I don't have anything wrong with me, all that sort of stuff. So you sort of got to want help as well. So I think being able to acknowledge your condition, and that's the reality, and deal with it's very impressive, because I don't think a lot of people do that for a myriad of things anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting thing as well, because it was interesting in one of the meetings that we had. it was a young girl came in, she'd just been diagnosed, and we all kind of were talking about how it felt to be diagnosed. And my answer was, it was hard to kind of come up with one, because for me, it was just like, well, when I got diagnosed, it was like, okay, well, this is the condition, this is what happens, this is why you've been feeling that way, and this is why your episode happened. This is the solution, and you know, it means you take medication. We might need to, you know, play around with it a bit, but like I was very much like, this is what you do. And for me, that made the acceptance of it all really quite easy. Again, I'll go back and say I was fortunate to have that support network, but yeah, that was an interesting experience for sure.
And what's your opinion on what we have to do next? Because if you look at the amount of awareness that's been created and the suicide rate, you know, it's probably about the same. Yet we've got obviously a lot more understanding, yet it's still, that doesn't seem to be having really much impact on the data anyway. So what do you think the next step is, or why does it keep happening? Is it social media coming into more play, or is it just, what is it? What's take a stab at it.
I really like what you said, and it's a post you've made, and you've said it in this interview as well. The time for awareness is over, but action should be here. I think the thing now is awareness is there. So when you bring it up with people, they can comprehend and kind of take that on board. But then what does that conversation look like? So, you know, I tell someone I've got bipolar. What are the next? What should a normal conversation about that look like? And you know, should everyone have a level of understanding of, okay, well, if I know a mate of mine's not in a good headspace, what are some things that I can recommend to them, or can I ask if they're doing? Not even recommend to them. Can I ask if they're, you know? So knowing the things that make people mentally fit again. So I guess it's the awareness is there, but now it's like, okay, can we kind of understand what practically we can do to help, even if it's just like, hey, are you talking to a doctor? I think that's, for me, that would be the next thing. And then I always say it's because I've been so fortunate with a support network. I think the next thing is building those support networks, or teaching this is probably better, teaching the person with the mental illness what they should do to give people more awareness. So, you know, there's awareness in general of the illness, but what are you telling the person with the mental illness of how can we communicate this to our friends? What can we tell them to give them strategies for us? So I think put the burden a little bit onto you know, myself and other people, and say, here's some strategies that you can tell your friends about your mental illness, rather than now this person knows about just depression. You know, how can we educate the people around me about the condition that we have? I think that's something as well.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good point, because obviously we have a lot of hotlines and numbers where you can text and get a qualified psychologist to call you back and stuff, which is fantastic. It's very hard to make people even to take that step, but I think equipping those with strategies and having the person as well, you know, these are the strategies, and having more generalized knowledge about everyone. All right, well, there's a mental health condition here. What is actually going to help this person? Is it something where, you know, we get up and move, or we go and do something, or what are some actual tangible strategies? If they've told me they've got schizophrenia, right, can I refer to something, right? Schizophrenia, bit of awareness around the condition, but these are some maybe general strategies you want to talk to the person about, and actual actionable items that you can actually try and do something. Because I know if you at least did something that way, if you had a friend or a family member with that, and you tried something, and then whatever happened, like, you know, if something happened, at least you've done something. The worst thing would be knowing that the person had a condition and you could have said something or done something, and you've just done very little. So how can we get those strategies into people's hands, whether it be an app or something? I don't know, but because I know that there's a lot of PDFs and stuff available, but, you know, how do you make that common knowledge? Is it something where you educate people in workplaces, or is it schools, or whatever it is?
Yeah, definitely.
Because I don't know what schools do at the moment, but I think schools would be a perfect place. You know, with people younger and younger, obviously social media is such a big thing, and mental health of kids, you'd think that, I know they've got I think it's a dedicated mental health professional or something starting in Victorian schools, but Yeah. Where do you start putting those strategies in place where actually we can get some tangible outcomes to decrease that line?
Yeah, well, exactly. And I think the other thing is, we all go through some level of first aid training as well. People know what to do if someone's having a stroke, or even epileptic fit. People know to kind of get things away from them and that sort of thing. Do you have those same procedures, or is there a first aid, training that you can do for mental health? Possibly that's something. And then
I love that point, Tim, because I'll interrupt you, sorry, because I love that point, because I know we do training with our job, and it's how many people do you know have had an epileptic seizure as compared to how many people do you know have a mental health condition or have had some form of mental illness? I would say one's a lot more than the other. I've never seen anyone have an epileptic fit. Not saying it doesn't happen, but I know a lot more people have had mental health issues. So it's a fantastic point what you said. Can we make that training, the first aid training? I know there is mental health first aid training, but can we incorporate that into one almost?
Yeah, exactly. And actually, that's a really interesting point. Yeah, I've never seen an epileptic fit, but I've talked to more people about mental health. Again,
I know how to do the pen. I know how to stab the pen. I know how to
the pen.
I know how to do that. And do some compressions, all that sort of stuff. But
I've never used it though, but I have used lived experience to talk about mental health. So that is an interesting point.
Now, where do you see? We're in 2021. We're coming out of a pretty unique time in the last 2 years, and obviously there's been a lot of mental health issues and stuff like that. Regardless, we're not getting into politics here, but people would say, "Oh, mental health issues," and the other side would say, "Well, suicide's still the same," all that sort of stuff. One thing I don't think people will realise is that PTSD is a very real thing. And in this 2 years, there's been a lot of trauma that people don't realise, and it's something that's going to come out in probably 5 to 10 years' time. And I don't know if just throwing a lot of money, because we know how much of an issue mental health is going to fix this in particular. So what are your thoughts on, let's say, the next year or the next couple of years forward coming out of the lockdown?
It's going to be really interesting. And I think the thing that I'm fascinated about is the acceptance of hybrid work, which I think is fantastic. I think it's great to be able to work from home 2 days a week. But is there going to be that same awareness of being able to physically see if someone's doing okay? Whereas, they might not show up to work in the office 2 days and then you go, oh, hang on, is that person okay? So it'd be interesting to kind of have some thoughts around what does it look like to be mentally okay at home as well, where it's really easy to just go to the next room, close the blinds and go into a depressive episode. Especially for me, speaking from my experience, that's sort of what was happening in the last 3 weeks or so, 3 months. That would be interesting as we're kind of coming into that as the more expected norm. I think people are because it was such the last 2 years has impacted a lot of people with their mental health. I think it's helped the conversation go along a little bit more. So I think there's also been some positives that's come from it too. But I don't know. What do you think? What do you think should be kept an eye on yourself?
Well, I think, for 22 years or whatever, the mental health system has been really neglected. It's quite annoying because Greg Hunt, who's the Federal Minister for Health, Greg Hunt had a bipolar mother who died in a psychiatric ward. So if anyone should know about mental health and how it affects children especially, it's Greg Hunt. I'm actually trying to get him on the podcast because I think his story is very important to share.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I'm going to try, but he doesn't manage his Instagram, so there's no point in messaging. I have to try and get through his email and presume he's getting a lot of hate from the vaccination people and about
you're down in the
it was going to be a struggle, but I think throwing money at allocating money is good, but hopefully it's spent well. Putting $1 billion to more awareness things, I don't think is going to do much. Actually, to programs that really help people, whether it be repurposing spaces in the city, mental health allowances for businesses to give to staff if they need to get some extra support. I think workplaces still have got a long way to go. I'm not going to bag my job at all, but I do know there's still, I'm just judging it from my experience, there's still a very old school mentality with a lot of bosses towards mental health. And that's not their fault. That's just the way I think if you're in a lot of older bosses might be like, say, 50 plus, they've still got that. I don't think they've got that real understanding of off mental illness and how it affects people and stuff like that, from my experience. But that's just
again, I must sound like the luckiest person in the world when it comes to mental health, because again, I had a boss at the time when I was going through a depressive episode who was fantastic. He actually didn't understand. He didn't understand to start with, but he was interested enough to ask questions to want to understand. And then he also had some lived experience with people in his personal life. But a really awesome line from him that he said to me one day, he's like, I find it very hard to empathize with your situation, because he was mentally healthy, but he wanted to sympathize with it.
I love that line.
And that was really cool. And to this day, we still have a friendship. I still call him, and that was a fantastic. If you look at sort of mental health and how a corporate workplace should deal with it, that was fantastic. Just that sort of interest to understand what was going on, and going, okay, I actually don't understand bipolar as much as I do, but I want to learn about it, and that was a really fascinating experience. And I think that would be an interesting thing for some employers to actually kind of take a care factor into it.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of lip service. I think there's a lot of corporate show fronting where they'll be a part of all these organisations and stuff, but internally, I would say from knowing people, the culture is not reflective of the external, community involvement per se.
Yeah, there's like talk versus action. Very easy to change your logo to a mental health awareness thing, or you see the rainbow logos on other. Very easy to change your logo. Very easy to speak about it. A little bit harder to take action. So, again, super fortunate that was the experience that I had. But I know that there's certain other bosses and workplaces that would still be a little bit backwards.
I love your line though. What you said for your boss said is I think it's very practical and it's very relatable. Like I can relate to it as well. Like, you might not be able to empathize with someone, but you can sympathize with someone. I think that's such a fantastic perspective, because that's in reality a lot of the times. Like if, for example, with me, like I find it very hard to empathize with someone who comes to me about mental health, who's just had minor depression, never been hospitalized, never had this. I find it very, you don't know, that's just the way. But I can sympathize with the condition. I think that's a perfect way to look at it. It's a fantastic line from your old boss.
Yeah, definitely.
So what are your plans for next year? What are you looking forward to? Yeah,
so this year has been really, really awesome with the business. I've kind of grown consistent clients, and it's been really fun just being able to build something that I enjoy doing, and having a schedule that fits around my lifestyle and my health. I'm really going to focus on, because the biggest thing this year that's been great, especially from a mental health perspective, is outsourcing certain tasks. So I started, like most businesses or small businesses, because you're good at a skill and you enjoy something, but now I've kind of dipped my toe into outsourcing some of the tasks, and that's been fantastic, training people to do what I'm doing sort of in the back end. And I think my biggest thing for next year is to really kind of get off the tools as much as I can, because that's the thing that also helps with my health too, because sometimes if I'm up at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. editing something, I should be sleeping and looking after my health. So if I can get more people with the outsourcing part of the business, that would be really fun. I enjoy teaching, I enjoy training, so that'll be good. And then again, my biggest goal this year for health was to go through the year without a sustained period of depression. And I got through winter, which is usually a period that I would slip down into without any kind of dips, which was fantastic. There were probably about 3 weeks, 4 weeks where I did fall into a bit of a mental health, but I'd say that I did that goal this year. So for next year, if I can do everything that I need to keep healthy for the entire 12 months, that would be a successful year again.
Good stuff. how can people find you and your business? Have you got your website live yet, or still going?
No.
Still going.
Website's still.
Sounds like me. It's like me.
Yeah. I think I even said like at the start of the year I should get the website done.
Don't worry, I'm the same as you.
Yeah. No, LinkedIn's great. If you want to contact me on LinkedIn, and so Tim Beanland, that's probably the best place, or Instagram, and even Facebook as well. Pretty contactable, or even message Joel. I'll get my website up and up.
And for those who's wondering, Tim's business is a lot of things, but it's a lot of content. You know, I'll teach you how to do a podcast, set up a podcast, the whole strategy behind it. You'll record episodes with them and then clip it up and all that sort of stuff for repurposing the. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, what else do you do as well beyond that?
So do more. Basically, like the thing this year, it's been creating 3 months worth of content for people in 45 minutes of their time. So I meet with them weekly, fortnightly, or monthly. We facilitate a conversation. I go away, edit that up, and find all the best bits from that. So they've got consistent content for a really lengthy period of time. So they wake up and they don't have to worry about what they're posting.
Which is something every business owner needs.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So thanks for coming along, Tim. Really appreciate your openness and some great advice. I love that line about the empathy, sympathise with you. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it, and good luck with everything with your business, and also keep doing what you're doing.
Cool. Thanks, mate. I really appreciate chatting, and thanks for having me on. Always good talking to you, either recorded on the microphone or even just Facebook chats. It's enjoy chatting to you, and thank you for being someone within my support network as well. So I appreciate that.
No, thanks, mate. Appreciate it.
Cool.
No, thanks, mate. Appreciate it. Thanks for your time.